So before we begin, a series of just a few acknowledgements, and the most important one being acknowledgement of country. So obviously, University of Queensland, and each of us individually, I hope, we acknowledge the traditional owners and the custodianship of the land on which we meet. And in this place, that's the Tuggerah and Yuggera peoples. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to the land. And we recognise their valuable contributions to Australia and global society. I also want to thank, before we kick off, everyone who's been involved in arranging today. I have the privilege of leading this initiative, but today's organisation and arrangements and agenda and so on, it's really down to Ben Seligman, who you've just seen, and I also want to thank Yifei and Andres for stepping in and being willing to man the audio visuals, and the Marcoms team have done a tremendous job of promoting this and helping and supporting in every way they can. And then finally, of course, the venue itself, who come in at the last minute and put cables on the floor and patches over things which weren't expected. The Resourcing Decarbonisation Initiative has been running for 2 years, and I'm Stephen Micthwaite. I have had the privilege of leading this initiative on behalf of the university and SMI. I'm a geoscientist by background, and I've also worked in industry. And I'm very pleased to say that this initiative has been quite successful. We'll move on to that in a second. One of the other things it has achieved, which is important for today, is some strong links with the University of Exeter through the Queensland University and Exeter University QEX scheme. And so we will have 2-3 speakers from Exeter today who are actually keynoting, and they'll be talking around issues of circularity in their keynotes. What is the initiative actually about? What's the essence of it? Well, there was a realization 3 years ago, and there's been a realization within society, that in order to achieve what we hope to achieve with the energy transition, we need an awful lot of material. And this infographic is quite busy, but it gives you a sense of the scale of the problem. And the graphs on the right are showing estimates of demand of various metals, strategic and critical metals, that are predicted forward through to 2050 based on the needs of the energy transition. The map in the middle obviously is Australia, and that is a calculation of the infrastructure we will have to build in Australia if we're going to achieve net zero and maybe export a little bit of power to our neighbouring nations in the Southwest Pacific to help them out. You can see that this calculation was done to find also the best locations where you're likely to have least conflict over land and resources and agriculture. But if we were to achieve that sense of scale, you'll be able to see those renewable energy centres from space, and the infrastructure that has to be built around the country in terms of electricity grids is massive. So that requires an awful lot of material, and not just critical metals, strategic metals, and also industry aggregates. And that, of course, implies an order of magnitude increase in waste as well. So one of the things we did at the start of Resourcing Decarbonisation is kick off a whole bunch of research projects, but we also commissioned a report by Ian Satchwell just on what Australia's role in the critical minerals sector is around the globe. And it's not the prettiest map, but that map of the world that you see with the bubbles, those represent the magnitude of activity, if you like, by Australian companies or companies that are headquartered in Australia. And there's 2 things to take away from that. One of them is, you can see we have got a global footprint. And the second thing to take away is shown here with the pie chart on the bottom left. Australia industry interests represent the largest share of influence in the supply of critical metals globally. Very much on parity with Canada, but Canada and Australia together would dominate that supply chain. That's very interesting for a few reasons. Canada has very strong regulations on how its companies operate internationally. It's done a good job of promoting that. And as a result of that, they now have trade commissions that have opened up all around the world on the back of them supporting that sector. And it's generating other forms of industry business for Canada. It also means that they can claim that they know what their ESG credentials are globally. They can track that for all their companies' operations. Australia doesn't have that systematic approach, and so are we missing a trick? The second thing that's worth noting or taking away from an infographic like this is we may well be very good at digging and shipping, but we are not actually supplying, influencing the control of the supply chain. We all know the geopolitical tensions around the world. We know that an awful lot of the product that we produce ends up channeled through one or two nations, and that causes enormous issues with diversity of supply. And we are missing the manufacturing. We're missing the added value onshore. I'm pleased to say today we have members of industry in the audience, including, I was talking to one gentleman earlier who's on the battery and high purity iron and aluminum supply end of the sector, and he's trying to achieve that in Australia. So please make sure that the breaks and things you all circulate and you all get to know each other. So unraveling the resourcing decarbonisation challenge is what I would call a wicked problem. This is just an illustration of that, very knotted, and all those little tags are some of the factors and issues that come up consistently in what we might need to tackle in order to be able to, if we were to genuinely meet the energy transition without having perverse outcomes. And that brings us to the mission statement or the problem statement for resourcing decarbonisation, which is recognising that demand, recognising that in tackling that demand, there are an awful large number of source and supply risks around mineral supply. That's not just critical metals, as I mentioned earlier, that is the high purity strategic metals, that is industry aggregates as well. There's also an issue with industry itself in its drive, its desire to mitigate its own carbon impacts. And there's questions around, well, what are the real barriers and hurdles to achieving the society we hope for? And we know it's broader than production. We know it's much broader than that. We know it's tangled up with market incentives, policy, understanding the complicated risks around community and environment that are associated with that transition. And so the goal of resourcing decarbonisation is really to tackle all those. This is a bit of an update on where the program's at. We've been running for 2 years. There was $1.5 million of seed funding from the University of Queensland, and then the goal or the targets, the KPIs, to leverage the funding from that seed funding with industry and government projects that are addressing many of the issues I've just discussed. Now, the graph in the top right, apologies, is a little bit small, but essentially if you just focus on the black bar and the blue bar, then the blue bar is the investment from Queensland, and the black bar is the co-investment from industry and government we've managed to attract through projects. And that just gives you an indication of the success of this. We've effectively exceeded, within 2 years, we've exceeded the 3-year targets that we were requested when we've managed to leverage nearly $4.5 million against that initial $1.5 million investment. There's been 24 projects, and today you're going to hear summaries of many of those. As Ben has already said, we're going to try something experimental. So we, as academics, like to put our students through 3MT competitions, where you have to explain your thesis in 3 minutes. I think that's a very good practice for us as researchers. And so the idea here is short form summaries of your projects, the results, the key results that are coming from that, interspersed with, I think it's 4 or 5 keynotes, which will go for 15 minutes. The bottom box shows you just some of the outputs and deliverables that we've got emerging through the program. And I think the one I'd like to focus on is the fact that this is a university strategic initiative, not an SMI one. We've obviously been successful in establishing projects from centres all across SMI, all the different centres, but also through the faculties of science and faculties of engineering, which is not listed there. And we've got great stakeholder engagement with various industry, government departments, and granting bodies. And finally, there is a question that we have to address today, begin thinking about as a community, which is what happens next. There are a few projects that are in the pipeline. Some of them are more confident than others. The second one, where we have an initiative that's setting up with Codelco, that project has been contracted, although the details of what will actually be happening in that project are still to be worked out. One of the key issues that we've identified in resourcing decarbonisation is this drive from industry and government, this need from society to obtain the materials for the energy transition quickly. And we recognise that to get a mine up and off the ground, there are enormous delays in that. The average now is, without stealing too much of Mark Knoppy's thunder, who will be talking on this later, but the average mine lifespan to get into production from discovery is 22 years. Now, if we add 22 years to 2025 for projects that we know about right now, we're only just meeting the energy transition. So the reality is there is an enormous shortfall there, because we need more projects than we know about to meet that gap. So that's leading to a supply and demand challenge. And one of the key areas of work is how do we accelerate responsibly? We know that Australia's history of mining is not pretty. And the existing regulations, though they've been strengthened, they still have gaps in. There's data gaps, there's knowledge gaps, there's policy areas which could do with improving. And at the same time, we want to be able to fast track, streamline that in some way. Where can you streamline? Where can't you streamline? What's industry practice involved that could be improved, and so on. So just drawing to a close, this is a busy slide. I do not want you to absorb the information here, but resourcing decarbonisation is effectively divided into 5 themes. The complexities around supply and risk, initiatives that address how you might reduce carbon intensity of the industry itself, what market incentives, business readiness issues are there that we can address, policy protections and social safeguards, and how all the risks that we know and challenges that we know associated with this topic, how they integrate. And the list on the left just shows you that relative to those 5 themes, we've done a pretty good job as an initiative in spreading out projects that are trying to address those topics. And the last slide is just a summary of where we're at for this year and how you might engage moving forward. So we have $130,000 to $230,000 left to disperse. It has to be spent by the end of this year. There are some projects that are in the background that if they come off, they will be calling on that. But there's still a lot of opportunity for all of you and all of your colleagues in the audience to engage. If you have government or industry co-investment, then you can ask for a larger portion of funding that would be effectively leveraged with our foundation program. If you just have an idea that you think could lead to subsequent projects and initiatives that can scale up, then that would qualify for strategic funding. Another thing we want to achieve by the end of this year is to bring together everyone's research. So this is a heads up to all of you who've done projects and who are running projects. We're going to create, hopefully, a summary open access web report, very similar to what Net Zero Australia achieved, where we can state the problem and we can highlight the key results that have emerged from this initiative over the 3 years. And then the final thing that I would encourage you all to do in terms of engagement is to work now with me and others to work together to think about how we might co-design and co-develop with industry and government initiatives to really tackle the challenges that remain outstanding. And really the Resourcing Decarbonisation Initiative has done a great job of highlighting those. We need more than 3 years to solve them. So with that, just finally, these pretty individuals who are on the screen are going to be the people who are doing keynotes. Oh, I've already mentioned the structure of the day with fast impact talks followed by 15-minute talks from everyone here. I'm pleased to say Sue Harrison, the Dean of Engineering, is going to follow me now. And then on the left, we have Eva Marquez, who will be talking about circularity and some of her work, I think, with the UN. Yep, that's right. We've got a joint keynote between Longzhang and Juan, which will be addressing circularity and economics of recycling mine waste. We've got Mark, who will talk at the bottom left about responsible acceleration and some of our initial findings on people's perceptions of that. We've got Catherine Sturman, who's going to be talking about social safeguards and some of the great work that they've been doing, her team's been doing, both in studies around Australia and in terms of promoting or representing these issues at the UN level. And then we've, of course, got Rick Valenta, the Director of SMI, who will wrap everything up. Thank you.